Hello, everybody. Welcome to the third edition of the Source Technology Cyber Team podcast. Join us here once a month here on the SourceTalks podcast network, here on LinkedIn and everywhere else, where myself and other great recruitment professionals and cybersecurity professionals will be breaking down challenges and future outlooks in the security industry. From both a internal perspective and a staffing one as well. I'm Alex, your host for today's talk, as always, joined here by Mike Miller. He's joined us here today in the third edition, as I've mentioned. We'll be sitting down with people like Mike here once a month to talk through some challenges and whatnot in the industry. So thank you everyone for joining. I'll hand it over to Mike to introduce himself and maybe some of his background, how he got into security, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, no problem. Well, thanks, Alex, for having me on. I appreciate this. I know you and I met through LinkedIn here just a few months back, and relationships grown. So I'm excited to be part of what you're doing. So yeah, I'll start with some of my background. I've been in IT for about IT/security for about 25 years. I'm an old school guy, so I started back when there was dial-up internet, and that's how I got into the field. Grew from there to working on server administration, went from there, got into defensive security, got into offensive security, red teaming for a while. And then I got into the auditing scene, mainly PCI. And from there, then I started doing a lot of vCISO work, helping companies understand, the big picture from a 30,000-foot view. And from there, I've tried to, I have a passion for this field, and I've tried to use that passion there's a huge gap right now in this field where there's just not enough people. There's job openings. It is competitive, but there's still a huge gap in the industry. So I've just kind of taken it on myself to try to lead people in the right direction to get a start in this industry, because it is so unique and it's extremely rewarding.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks for going through that. And I'm definitely excited to chat through some of this stuff. Obviously, you've been in the industry for quite a while. I'm relatively new, and I'm obviously on more of the talent side. But what do you think are maybe the one or two biggest challenges you're seeing for hiring managers on the security side in attracting talent and getting people to jump on board?
Yeah, no problem. I think for the hiring side, I think it's a case of being able to weed through and find people that kind of stand out, right? In this industry, and it's something I post about a lot, you have so many people that are what I call cert chasing. They're just chasing certifications and they're not chasing that knowledge, right? So over time, what happens and what's happening is these certifications, unfortunately, are becoming less valuable. They were extremely valuable when there weren't so many people that had them, but now there's this saturation. So now I think the challenge for the hiring managers is to do interviews that are technical, so that they can vet these people that are applying, and instead of just crossing a box off, hey, he has his CISSP or his CEH, he or she, that they don't just take that in factor. They interview the people well, they vet them well, they put them through a couple rounds, and and look at the knowledge that they have. The other thing that I see as well are these job descriptions that are, I guess, what I call wish lists. But the problem is, as they'll list that you have to have 5 or 6 certifications, you have to have an entry level position, you have to have 5 years of experience. And in the long run, they're just looking for someone that can do the job, that can grow in that job, right? But the deterring factor is the person who is new to the industry. They're seeing that job description, that generic job description that says 5 years, you must have 4+ certifications, whatever. And instead of applying and trying to get themselves known or get themselves into that position, they're just clicking on something else, and I think there's just a gap there, and what is wanted and what is being seen.
Right. Yeah, I would definitely agree. From my perspective, job descriptions can certainly be misconstrued, because obviously a business will have a need. They need somebody to perform this task, depending on how senior it is. And often what they portray for what they need isn't quite fitting, and definitely cuts off a lot of candidates, opens up to candidates they wouldn't necessarily want. So that's definitely a long-term learning process, I think, for hiring managers. On the other side, what do you think are maybe the biggest challenges for security professionals in trying to join these businesses, get into the industry?
I think it's knowing where to start, right? This a lot of my previous posts talk about this as well. The cybersecurity and infosec realm that we're in, it seems small, but it's very broad, right? You have offensive security, which I talk about. You have defensive security. You have purple team, you auditing. You have all of these different things, and it can be overwhelming for someone who's aspiring to get into this field. So my suggestion is to pick a path, right? Eventually, yes, you can try to know a lot about a lot of those different things, but pick a path. Choose defensive security and jump into it, learn everything you can. Choose offensive security or choose auditing. Just like, pick a swim lane, I'd say, and stay in that swim lane and be careful to not cross over to that other lane. And that way you can learn as much as you can about that particular sector of
Hmm.
this industry. Then from there, once you're in the field as, maybe a SOC analyst, a blue teamer, on a defensive side, from there, now that you've got that job and you're learning more about that job, but then maybe start studying the offensive side. And then over time, maybe over the next 5 years, you might have an understanding of more about compliance, more about offense, more about defense, and then that tunes you kind of over the years to get into maybe a management role, so that you can walk into a room and talk to blue teamers, red teamers, and have a
Right.
conversation with all of them.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I'm trying to think because I've definitely talked to plenty of people trying to get in the
Yep.
industry, people that are already kind of in the industry, and often they do try to specialize. Do you think there is a certain swim lane or path that might fit certain people better, or one that you've seen that just kind of works out more?
A really good question. So, yes. So, I'll talk about three different ones. First, I'll talk
Right.
about auditing, right? So, with auditing, you can, I just saw it. I have a friend who just got into auditing, fresh out of college, no experience, got hired by an awesome company, and has a degree. But anyhow, jumped into auditing, very fresh. And he doesn't have a technical background, but that's okay, because with auditing, you have different frameworks. You have, ISO, you have SOC 2, you have PCI, and learning those frameworks helps you learn the controls and things, how things need to be protected. And just by the nature of it, as you learn those frameworks, you're going to kind of accidentally learn a lot of those technical pieces, right? So I think if you don't have any technical skills at all, I think auditing is a great entryway to get into this field. Um, Now you have the guys. Everybody wants to be a pen tester. It's a big,
Yeah.
big buzzword. It's probably the most competitive. The biggest issue I'm seeing with pen testers right now is everyone wants to be a pen tester, but you have to start with some basic network concepts. You have to understand how a router works, how wireless works, how servers work. So on the offensive side, and you can teach yourself all of this stuff. Try Hack Me. You can download VMs, and, ISOs, and so on. Set components up so that you can practice and get some hands on. Because if you're really a tech guy and like that's what does it for you, then go offense, because you're going to get bored at compliance and doing auditing. Now at the same time, if you have light technical, I'd say none to light technical skills. The defensive side is good as well, is just as great as well. You have people that love doing entry level roles, being intrusion detection person, a SOC analyst, to get into those fields. People are hiring entry level people for those fields because it's very trainable.
Hmm.
The biggest thing, and I tell people, is if you have the desire, the confidence, and the drive, you're not going to have any issues, because companies are willing to teach the skills.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think from my perspective as well, hiring managers often talk about, we don't want a jack of all trades most of the time. We want a, master of none, essentially.
Yep,
So
yep.
especially for early level professionals, I think side projects like you mentioned, and like OWASP, for example, are great things to
Yep,
have on your resume, and especially on the offensive
absolutely.
side.
Yes.
Um, Kind of doubling back into the certifications
Yep.
conversation. Obviously, like a CISSP is kind of the crown jewel in offensive security, the OSCP.
Yep.
Um, Obviously those are important certifications to get, and
Yes.
we can have a conversation on whether hiring managers should really require those or not. But for maybe early to mid-level information security professional, which ones do you think are the most important? And they're obviously expensive as well, so
They
it's
are.
good
Yeah,
to kind of,
it's an investment. Yeah.
yeah.
I would say the ones I'll talk about are mainly on the offensive side, right?
Mhm.
Because that's where everybody seems to want to go. They want to be pen tester. I would say on the offensive side, start with something basic, your Security Plus, right? It's a good certification. It holds a lot of weight, right? It shows that you have the initiative and the get up and go to go grab that certification. After that, I would probably say the CEH, Certified Ethical Hacker. I would most likely say that one. From there, it's a tough one. I personally think anything after the CEH is kind of just a personal thing of what you want. You can go get the OSCP if you want to. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of time. Personally, I would go get the CEH and then just get as much practical and hands-on that you need. I still in all my years have never seen anyone paid more because they have their OSCP than if they have their CEH. If everything
Mm,
else is equal, I have not seen those two, one pay more than the other, you know.
mm,
That's just in my opinion. But at the same time, the cert business has gotten so big,
yeah.
so profitable. And I just saw a chart the other day. I commented on it. I'll have to go and look it up of all of the certifications for the different sectors, and it's just crazy. It's just
Yeah.
overwhelming,
Yeah.
and I can see how people still get confused and not knowing where to go,
Yeah, because I feel like at some point they'd all be teaching a relatively similar thing. There's only so much you can really have within a
Yeah.
certification, but
TCP/IP is TCP/IP, right?
yeah,
Firewalls are firewall. Like, you're right. Certifications in a roundabout way are teaching kind of the same thing. Some dive deeper, some are
right.
more like the CISSP is, on all of the domains and more managerial, right? So yeah, it's personal preference. But if you have to have one and you're just starting, I'd say the Security Plus because it has some weight. And
Hmm.
personally, I'd grab a Security Plus and get a good job somewhere.
Yeah,
And then if they want you to go get a cert, go get the CEH,
right, right.
Yeah,
And then,
don't.
yeah, go
Go
ahead.
ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and then as far as like certain businesses or companies that younger professionals should be targeting, do you think, smaller consultancies or consultancies in general are a great place to start because you get a lot of different client work, or just jumping right in with maybe a larger internal business is smarter?
Yeah. So I've never had any preference, right? So I've worked for the big companies, right? I've worked for huge companies that everybody's heard of. I've worked for companies that are a 20-man operation. In the end, for me, it's about culture, right? So, but if you're just getting into the field, some of the larger well, you have to remember some of the larger companies have clients that may be government clients that have, certain, you have to have your clearance, you have to
Yeah.
have, there's just more requirements to that. So I would say personally getting into this field, if you can find a 20 plus man company, start smaller. The biggest thing I see now is people, they'll apply for a job, and because there's so many jobs out there, right? They'll
Yeah.
apply for a job, they think they're going to get it, and that whole interview process, as takes a couple weeks, and they're sitting and just thinking about that particular job. 2 weeks later, they get denied for that job, and now they're starting over. And I tell
Right.
people, if you're going to apply for a job, get that interview, but then at the same time, work in parallel. Man, you should be applying every day to something new. And in the
Yeah.
end, you should have 3 or 4 or 5 different interviews in parallel with different companies, and you get to pick, which one you want. So just don't waste that time of waiting, for someone to get back to you. Like, work in parallel.
Yeah, that's a good call out for sure. And then I know we've talked a little bit in the past. You just brought up like government and DoD contracts, but for
Yep.
certain groups like veterans that are trying to transition into the industry specifically, instead of people out of college or whatever, what do you think
Yep.
are some good tips specifically for groups like veterans or people maybe moving to the U.S. or something?
Yeah, leverage that experience. If you're just coming out of the military, and if you have, your secret clearance or higher, I mean, those are definitely key items that some companies need. And it's a process. I mean, I had mine at one time. I'm not active anymore, but it's a process to get all of those, and it costs companies money to get those for you as well. So
Hmm.
leverage what you have. What stands apart with you than somebody else. If I'm coming out of the military, and I have my clearance, I'm certainly gonna target more clearance type jobs than I would, private sector, things that don't classify data like that.
Yeah, definitely. I think just taking advantage of what you have in general across
Exactly.
really any industry when you're looking for a
Yep.
job is important.
Yep.
I'm trying to think. Those are kind of the main questions I had as far as what's going on in the industry. I'm curious if you have any other call outs or if you have any questions for myself on, the talent side that might be worth bringing up.
Yeah. So what's your biggest frustration that you're seeing? When you're interviewing people or whatever. Like, what makes you roll your eyes at the end of the day
Yeah.
and say, "Come on, man."
Yeah, I think there's a couple. I mean, the job descriptions thing we've brought up just earlier. Obviously, as a recruiter, you have to really understand what the company's looking for. You have
Yep.
to advocate for their business and really get candidates interested,
Yep.
depending on the company.
Yeah.
And when job descriptions are written, quote unquote, poorly, or they don't necessarily know what they're looking for, that can cause frustration for myself and the candidates.
Yeah.
And so, obviously with the clients that I work with and recruiters work with in general, just working through that and being able to talk to hiring managers about what they really want and maybe kind of stray away from the job description and just be able to say it yourself has been a good tactic, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think as well, the certifications thing we've brought up, some companies we work with are very hard set on that. And
Yep.
I get why, but it's certainly, I've talked to plenty of people that I think are quite qualified beyond just
Makes
the
no sense.
certifications,
Yeah, it makes no
um,
sense.
which is
Yeah.
frustrating. And, we advocate for candidates as best we can, but there's only so much we can do. And then also certain roles within the security industry, a lot of people get called out as job hoppers. People are either working contract or full time, but often people are, for a full-time business, you want somebody to come in, be with the company and really grow with the business. And it makes sense. But a lot of people, especially with COVID in the last 2 years, have had to jump around and, have various reasons. And oftentimes hiring managers can get stuck up on that. And we do our best
Yeah.
to advocate, but that's another kind of drawback I've seen in general on the talent
The
side.
year of the Great Resignation, man. I
Yeah.
mean, I read about it all the time, and
Yeah.
you actually bring up a really good point that I don't get to talk about this that much, but I think one of the biggest issues too, and I see posts about it, is recruiters or company HR departments will put a post out there about a job description, and they have a range of what they can pay, and maybe it's 80 grand up to 150 grand, right?
Hmm.
And companies, so private sector, right? Companies, they look at the bottom line. I see complaints all the time about, companies should just put it out there of exactly what they're paying. I just don't think you're going to see that much. And the reason
Yeah.
why is because in the end, it's a business. When if you think about the retail industry, if someone's selling TVs, they want to buy that TV as cheap as they can so they can
Yeah.
turn around and resell that for as much margin as they can. And it's unfortunate, but this is a business world. And so, people, they do need, people who are getting hired, you do need to learn a little bit of negotiation, right? Because companies
Definitely.
are going to hire you at, unfortunately, maybe lower than what you want because they're looking at bottom line. They have investors and so on that are looking at the numbers. And so that's something too that I think it's going to
Hmm.
take years to change. Because the other thing too, because you talk about hopping around, right? And I've suggested to people over the years, I have a friend that's been a personal friend of mine that's been in this field for literally, he's been at one place for over 20 years, right?
Yeah.
And personally, he's not getting paid what he should be getting paid. He started as just like an IT support kind of person, and worked his way into this to a security position, but he's not making half of what he should be making in that
Yeah.
position. The reason why is because he's working for the same company for 20 years. They're not just going to go to him and say, "Hey, man, you're awesome. We're going to pay you 110% more than what you're making now," right?
Hmm.
The only way that he is going to get a bump is to move, is to go somewhere else. And I've done it. I have bounced around some in this field, and unfortunately, sometimes you have to do that.
Hmm.
Anymore, it seems like a 2 or 3 year stay at a company is a long stay, especially now with COVID. You get a
Right.
guy that's in 6 months.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. But I
Yeah.
kind of went all over there. But yeah, definitely some points that I think about a lot.
Yeah, certainly. And it'll obviously depend on the type of company, if it's a startup or if it's a public business. And you see some
Exactly.
states like Colorado and I think New York recently that have passed legislation towards you really have to advertise what the compensation bandings are,
Yes.
um,
Yeah.
which I think is good for transparency, but definitely brings up problems for companies as well. So definitely
Oh yeah.
interesting. Um,
Yeah,
do you,
absolutely.
yeah. Do you have any other questions specifically on the talent side potentially?
Um, not on the talent side. I would just, well, I'll ask this, right? Because I talk about this a lot in my posts and in my
Hmm.
small little LinkedIn network. The resumes versus LinkedIn profiles, right?
Mm,
So I haven't shot a resume out in years,
yeah.
but I've used for me to get work, contract work or whatever, I've kind of put myself out there and they see my LinkedIn profile and, some click away and say, this guy's an idiot, or some say, hey, maybe we can use his services.
Hmm.
And that's been successful for me. How much weight do you put on checking out someone's LinkedIn profile and what they're doing online and, versus just because resumes anymore they just seem to all look the same, right?
Yeah,
So
that's a very interesting question. And honestly, since I've been recruiting within security specifically, like I don't think I've had a candidate denied or not looked at as much because of their lack of LinkedIn. I send out
yeah,
people that have 20 connections, for example, but have a really
yep,
strong resume. I
yep,
will say when a resume is lacking in any which way, and obviously as a recruiter, we try to help them work through that. But when we send it
yep,
out and it might be lacking in any way, if they have a really strong, presence on LinkedIn, there might be more details there. I think it
yeah,
definitely has been helpful. And I've heard that from hiring managers. So
yeah, yeah,
obviously LinkedIn is a great tool and it's kind of people's personal preference how much they want to use it, but
yep,
I still think having a really strong resume will
yeah,
definitely be the best option in general.
yeah. And that's another thing too is people just don't be afraid to go get someone to help you with your resume because
Yeah.
some people are so smart and have so many skills, but they're not good at talking about themselves, right?
Hmm.
So they have a hard time putting that on a piece of paper. So
Yeah.
that's something too. Like, don't be afraid to go get someone to help you with that type of
Yeah,
thing.
definitely. There's tons of services that can do it. And obviously, if you're working with a recruiter as
Exactly.
well, you would argue that they would help you. Or at least we
Yeah.
try to as much as we can. But
Yeah.
you're definitely
Yeah.
right. There's a lot of resources out there to build really strong resumes. Because I think the number one thing I see is people just don't display um, the impact they've had on the business. They just write out the responsibilities, and it's like,
Yep.
okay, well, how many engagements have you had? Say in a year.
Yeah.
How many
Yeah.
projects have you successfully completed
Yep.
rather than just
Yep.
I work on these projects. Those are
Yeah.
great ways to impress hiring managers,
You're
definitely.
right. The biggest thing that I see is, resume. I have people sending to me just to look at because they're trying
Yeah,
to get into the field, and they'll send me a resume, and it's a list of 25 software tools that they know how to use.
yeah.
And I'm like, that's great, but exactly what you said. Tell me how you've
Mhm,
used them. Tell me what you've been able to leverage with these tools and how you've
mhm.
made a difference in the business. So
Yeah,
not just a list of tools.
yeah, and I think people forget sometimes as well. There it's potentially a difference between a resume and a CV. A CV is just a years potentially of overall experience you have, very
Yep.
detailed, would list all those tools. A resume, I would argue, is more tailored towards a job you're applying for and would usually only be
Yeah.
a page, maybe two.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
and I'd argue most people only have one of those. Like for example, when I was
Yeah.
applying for roles, I only had one. But build out your CV over time, and then tailor a
Oh
resume
yeah.
for each role you're trying to go for, or each hiring
You're
cycle you go
right.
through.
Yeah, and you just made a point too. There's nothing wrong with, so let's say you have someone who's trying to, they have an interest in auditing, they have an interest in defense or offense. Nothing wrong as long as you have the skills to back that up.
Hmm.
Nothing wrong with having three different resumes that cater to each one of those types of positions.
Definitely, definitely.
Definitely, in this field, you can never put things down that you don't know because you will get called out so fast on them. But if you have those skill sets, customize your resume for each one, you
I
know?
would, yeah, certainly. I would definitely agree.
Yeah.
Well, good. I think we brought up some great points. Like I said, I don't necessarily have anything else to bring up.
Yeah. No, it's been
Unless you
great.
do, then obviously for everybody listening, we're going to be having these once a month, and we're going to have people like Mike jump on all the time and talk through this stuff. It's great having professionals like yourself jump on, and obviously
Thanks. I appreciate that.
I'm relatively new in the industry, so people with your experience is always great to hear from.
Well, you're doing a good job. I watch what you do online too, and I think you're making some headway. So good job with
Cool.
that.
Well, I appreciate that, Mike.
Yeah.
Unless you have anything else, I will let everybody go. Thank you, everybody, so much for listening. Like I said, we'll be back once a month. Cheers.